"Get out of the truck. Now." The words weren't a request. They were a command, sharp and jagged, slicing through the thick, soupy humidity of the East Texas night. The air, heavy with the scent of damp pine needles and wet earth, suddenly felt charged, electric with menace. A violent, pulsating strobe of red and blue light painted the cab of the Ford F-150 King Ranch in chaotic flashes, turning the rich leather interior into a scene of jarring conflict. The world outside the windows was a swirling vortex of aggressive color against an impenetrable blackness. For a moment, it was disorienting, a scene ripped from a nightmare. From the driver's seat, a voice, calm as a still lake but with an undercurrent of solid steel, responded, "Officer, may I ask what the problem is?" The only answer was a furious bellow, impatient and seething with contempt. "The problem is you're gonna do what I say. Hands on your head. Get on your knees." Then came a sound, a small, metallic click that carried more weight and terror than the shout that preceded it. It was the unmistakable, bone-chilling sound of a pistol's hammer being deliberately cocked. In that instant, the two men bathed in the flashing lights thought they had won. They saw their target, a lone black man in an expensive truck caught on a deserted stretch of highway in the dead of night. In their small world, this was the perfect equation for absolute power. They were the law and he was the subject. They held all the cards, held all the power. They were about to learn, in the most permanent and humiliating way possible, that power isn't always held by the person with the gun. Sometimes true power is quiet, it's disciplined, and sometimes it's waiting on the other end of a phone call. In just a few short minutes, a single call to the most fortified, most powerful military building on planet Earth would bring their entire world, their careers, their misplaced sense of superiority, crashing down around them in a spectacular ruin. Just 6 hours earlier, the man at the center of this roadside drama was 1,300 miles away, breathing the sterile, recycled air of a world defined by pressed uniforms, hushed tones, and classified documents. Colonel Marcus Thorne, 48 years old and feeling every single one of them, ran a calloused hand over his tired face. The light in the Pentagon conference room was a flat, unforgiving fluorescent glare that seemed to leach the life out of everything it touched. The meeting had been a grueling marathon, a deep dive into the kind of logistical calculus that made his head ache. Troop movements in Eastern Europe, budgetary shortfalls for a new cyber warfare initiative, and, most relevant to his own life, the final planning stages for a massive new joint training facility down at Fort Cavazos in the heart of Texas. It was the kind of high-stakes, mind-numbing work that was the secret engine of the U.S. military. Marcus was a soldier's soldier, a man who felt more at home with the grit of the field than the gloss of a boardroom table. He'd cut his teeth in the Rangers, earned his place in the elite, shadowy world of Delta Force. He had seen the sun rise over the deserts of Iraq and felt the biting cold of the Afghan mountains. He had faced down enemies who wanted him dead for the flag on his shoulder, and he had made decisions that carried the weight of life and death. Now he was a senior advisor, a strategist. His voice was heard in the highest echelons of power. He was respected. He was even feared. But at that moment, sitting under the seal of the Department of Defense, he wasn't Colonel Thorne. He was just Marcus, a husband who missed his wife, Sarah, a father who was immensely proud of his daughter, Maya, who was just weeks away from starting her freshman year at the University of Texas in Austin. He was just a man who desperately wanted to go home. The heavy, soundproof door of the conference room closed behind him with a soft hiss, shutting out the world of global strategy. As his polished boots clicked on the immaculate floors of the Pentagon's corridors, he could feel the pull of Texas, a gravitational force calling him south. He missed the oppressive, comforting blanket of the summer heat. He missed the impossibly wide-open skies that made you feel both small and infinite at the same time. He even missed the sight of the ridiculously oversized pickup trucks that clogged the I-35. He was bone-tired, the kind of exhaustion that seeps deep into your marrow, but the thought of the long, solitary drive ahead was a comfort. It was a straight shot through the night, a 1,000-mile buffer zone between his two worlds. It was a chance to decompress, to shed the skin of the colonel and become Marcus again, before he walked through his front door. Home was the mission now. The miles melted away under the silent, powerful rotation of the F-150's wheels. The SUV he had rented for the Drivia top-of-the-line model chosen for its comfort and reliability on long hauls hummed along the interstate, a black phantom devouring the white lines of the highway. He left the DC Beltway behind, watching the urban sprawl give way to the rolling hills of Virginia and the Carolinas. He drove through the night, a solitary traveler in a cocoon of quiet leather and soft dashboard light. The world outside was a blur of darkness, punctuated by the occasional lonely glow of a distant town. This was his process of purification. With every state line he crossed, he felt a layer of the Pentagon's pressure slew off. Tennessee became Arkansas. Louisiana's swampy, humid air started to feel familiar, a prelude to home. Finally, he crossed the Sabine River. The sign on the side of the road was a welcome sight. Welcome to Texas. The pine trees grew taller here, standing like silent sentinels along the highway. The air, tasted through the slightly open window, grew heavier, thick with the promise of home. He had veered off the interstate, taking a more direct route on Highway 59, a lonely ribbon of blacktop that cut a path straight through the deep woods of East Texas. He glanced at the truck's dashboard clock.
1:30 nachts.
He was making excellent time. He'd be pulling into his driveway in Austin before the sun had a chance to burn the morning mist off the Colorado River. He could already picture it. A hot shower, a strong cup of coffee brewed by Sarah, the comfortable weight of his favorite armchair. His cell phone, resting in the center console, lit up and vibrated, cutting through the low hum of the road. The screen read Sarah. A genuine smile touched his lips for the first time in hours. He tapped the screen to answer, the call patching through the truck's Bluetooth system. "Hey you," he said, his voice warm and filled with a fondness that would have surprised the generals he'd been briefing earlier. "I was just thinking about you." Sarah's voice filled the cabin, a welcome and familiar sound. "Just making sure my soldier is staying awake out there. How far out are you? I'm tracking you on the app. You're in the middle of nowhere." He chuckled. "It's not nowhere, it's East Texas. There's a difference. I just passed through a little town called Oak Creek. Should be home in a few more hours. Tell Maya not to wait up for her old man. She's already asleep, probably dreaming about decorating her dorm room." "I'm sure," Sarah replied, a hint of laughter in her voice. "Just drive safe, Marcus. These back roads can be weird at night." "I love you." "I love you too," he said, the words a comforting ritual. "See you in the morning." He ended the call, the small smile lingering on his face. A profound sense of peace settled over him. The stress, the classified briefings, the weight of his uniform, it all felt a million miles away. He was almost home. He was safe. And that's when he saw it. It wasn't a gradual appearance. It was a sudden, jarring burst of light in his rearview mirror. A violent flash of red and blue that materialized out of the darkness behind him, clinging to his bumper like a predator that had been stalking him in the shadows. A local police cruiser, a Ford Explorer, aggressively closing the distance. Marcus's entire body tensed. His peace shattered into a million pieces. His eyes flicked to his speedometer. He was holding a steady 65 miles per hour, exactly the posted speed limit. He mentally retraced his last few miles. He hadn't swerved. He'd used his signal at the last turnoff miles back. His rental plates were valid. His registration was current. There was absolutely no legitimate reason for this stop. But he knew the reason. His stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. He knew it with a certainty that was as depressing as it was infuriating. A black man, driving a $60,000 truck, alone, on a dark road in a small Texas town where he didn't belong. It was a narrative he knew by heart, a story as old and as ugly as the roads themselves. The siren blared to life, a piercing, gut-wrenching shriek that ripped the night apart. It was unnecessarily loud, an overt act of aggression. A heavy sigh escaped his lips. The weariness he felt was no longer from the long drive or the lack of sleep. It was a deep, soul-crushing weariness. He dutifully flicked on his right turn signal and slowly, deliberately, guided the massive F-150 onto the gravel shoulder of the road. The tires crunched to a stop. With practiced movements, he put the truck in park, killed the engine, and then, most importantly, he reached up and turned on all the interior dome lights, illuminating himself completely. He placed both hands, fingers spread wide and visible, on the top of the steering wheel. It was a procedure he drilled into hundreds of young soldiers, of all races, for 2 decades. Stay calm.
No sudden moves.
Announce everything you do before you do it. Your only goal is to de-escalate. Your only goal is to survive the encounter. Now, here he was, Colonel Marcus Thorne of the United States Army, having to follow his own advice, not in a foreign war zone, but on a roadside in the country he had sworn his life to defend. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He watched in the side mirror as 2 car doors slammed shut. 2 silhouettes detached themselves from the police cruiser, their forms distorted by the blinding glare of their own headlights. They moved with a swagger, a deliberate, heavy-footed gait that was meant to intimidate. One was short and built like a fire hydrant, a bulldog of a man. The other was taller, leaner, with a predatory stillness about him. They split up, flanking the truck, one taking the passenger side, one approaching him. This was a tactical approach designed to disorient and control. The short one, whose name tag he could just make out in the flashing light, so Beeb came to his window. He didn't speak. He rapped his knuckles, hard, against the glass, the sound sharp and demanding. Marcus took a calming breath and smoothly lowered the window. The night air flooded the cabin, thick and oppressive. "License and registration," Cobb said. His voice was flat, devoid of any professional courtesy. It was the tone one uses for a suspect, not a citizen. "Of course, officer," Marcus replied, keeping his voice perfectly even and respectful. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" A nasty little smirk twisted Cobb's lips. It was a smirk of practiced authority, of someone who enjoyed this part of his job. "Failed to maintain a single lane back there a few miles," he said, the lie rolling off his tongue with ease. "Looked like you were weaving. You been drinking tonight?" "No, sir, I have not," Marcus said, ignoring the blatant falsehood. Arguing the stop itself was pointless. It was the pretext. Arguing now would only be seen as resisting. He knew the game. He knew the steps. "Okay," he said slowly, making sure his hands never left the steering wheel. "My registration and proof of insurance are in the glove compartment, directly in front of my passenger seat. I'm going to unbuckle my seatbelt and reach for it now. My wallet with my driver's license is in the inner pocket of my jacket, which is on the passenger seat. I will get that for you next. Are those movements okay with you, officer?" Cobb just grunted, his eyes narrow slits. Marcus moved with a deliberate, almost robotic slowness. Every action was telegraphed. He retrieved the documents from the glove box and then his wallet. He passed them out the window. Cobb snatched the papers from his hand. His eyes skimmed the driver's license, Colonel Marcus Thorne, but the title clearly didn't register. Or he simply didn't care. To Officer Cobb, the man in front of him wasn't a person with a history or a rank. He was a type, profile. The taller officer, Jensen, now leaned down on the passenger side, his face uncomfortably close to the window, peering into the immaculately clean vehicle with an air of undisguised contempt. "This is a real nice truck," Jensen said, his voice a low drawl dripping with insinuation. "This your truck?" "Yes, it is," Marcus replied, his gaze fixed forward. Jensen let out a low, mocking chuckle. "You sure? A King ranch like this, fully loaded, costs a real pretty penny. You gotta be a mighty successful businessman to be able to afford something like this." The word businessman was wrapped in audible quotation marks. The sarcasm was thick enough to choke on. The implication was as clear as the flashing lights painting his face. Drug dealer. Marcus felt that familiar, hot knot of anger tighten in his gut. It was an anger born of 1,000 tiny cuts, a lifetime of having to prove his legitimacy, his worth, his very right to exist in certain spaces. He had commanded men who would follow him to the gates of hell. He had briefed four-star generals and foreign dignitaries. He had borne the weight of his nation's trust. And here, on a forgotten stretch of Texas highway, he was being reduced to a cheap, racist stereotype by two men whose only authority came from a badge and a gun. He locked his jaw. He stared straight ahead at the dark woods beyond the glare of the headlights. He would not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. He would not play their game, but they were determined to make him play. Step out of the vehicle. The command from Officer Cobb was sharp, breaking the tense silence. It was the next step in the script, the predictable escalation. Marcus kept his hands on the wheel. Am I being detained, officer? Or am I free to go? He knew the answer, but the question was a necessary formality, a way of establishing the legal ground he stood on, however shaky it felt. Cobb leaned in close to the open window, his face just inches from Marcus's. The smell of stale coffee and chewing tobacco wafted into the cab. His voice dropped to a low, menacing growl. You're being told what to do. Now get out of the damn truck before I pull you out. His eyes were small, hard points of undisguised hostility. The air in the cab grew thick, charged with unspoken violence. The quiet respect Marcus had demanded and received his entire adult life, from the barracks of Fort Bragg to the halls of the Pentagon, had completely evaporated into the humid Texas night. Here, in this moment, his rank, his service, his entire identity meant less than nothing. To these men, he was an object to be controlled. And then came the sound that punctuated the threat, turning it from a possibility into a promise. Click. It wasn't loud, but it was definitive. Cobb had unholstered his Glock. He wasn't pointing it not yet, but his hand was now firmly on the grip, his thumb resting on the back of the slide. It was a clear, unambiguous display of force. A threat made plain. I'm not gonna say it again, Cobb hissed. Get out. Marcus Thorne, a man who had faced down RPGs and IEDs, looked from Cobb's hateful eyes down to the matte black of the holstered pistol, then back up. He had stared down the barrels of countless enemy weapons. He had faced men who wanted to kill him for the flag he wore. But this felt profoundly different. This was a deeper, more personal kind of violation. The enemy in a foreign land was an expected threat. This right here was a betrayal. It was an assault by the very system he had sworn to protect. With a slow, controlled exhale, Marcus unlocked his door. He swung his long legs out and stood up, his hands raised to shoulder height in a universal gesture of surrender. The gravel crunched loudly under his expensive boots. He was a tall man, 6'2", and his physical presence, even in this position of submission, was formidable. It seemed to irritate the officers even more. Jensen, the taller of the two, began to circle him like a shark sizing up its prey. His eyes raked Marcus up and down, taking in the tailored slacks, the fine leather jacket, the confident way he held himself despite the circumstances. Look at this guy, Dale, Jensen said to his partner, his voice dripping with mockery. All dressed up with nowhere to go. Where you comin' from, big shot? A big city party. Marcus kept his voice even, betraying none of the fury boiling just beneath the surface. I'm returning from a business trip. A business trip? Cobb sneered, stepping closer to him, invading his personal space. You bet. What kind of business? The kind that involves unmarked duffel bags and late-night drives through the backwoods. Marcus's training was a loud roar in his head. Observe, assess, control your own response. Do not escalate. But the man in him, the citizen, the father, wanted to lash out. He held it in check, a feat of discipline honed over 30 years of service. He decided to give them a piece of the truth, hoping the weight of the words might act as a shield, a de-escalation tool. It was a calculated risk. I am a federal employee, he stated, his voice calm and firm. It was a catastrophic mistake. To them, it wasn't a statement of fact. It was a challenge to their authority. It was a man they had already profiled as a criminal, trying to claim a status they believed he didn't deserve. Jensen burst out laughing, a harsh, ugly sound. A federal employee. You hear that, Dale? This guy probably works for the post office and thinks he's a big deal. He took another step closer, his face now inches from Marcus's. You think your little government ID means something out here? Let me tell you something. The only law that matters on this road tonight is standing right here in front of you. It's us. Cobb's patience, already worn thin, finally snapped. His face contorted into a mask of rage. On your knees. Marcus stood his ground. His military training, his entire life's experience, screamed at him to obey, to survive the encounter. But his pride, his dignity, not as a colonel but simply as a man, refused to yield. He had never knelt for an enemy. He would not kneel for this. No, he said. The word was quiet, almost a whisper, but it landed in the space between them like a detonator being triggered. The air went still. Jensen's mocking smile vanished. Cobb's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed into slits of pure fury. What? Cobb said, his voice dangerously low. Did you just say to me? He said no, Dale, Jensen supplied, a new, vicious excitement in his tone. I think this fella needs a little persuasion. Before Marcus could react, Jensen lunged forward and shoved him, hard, in the center of his chest. Marcus, a man whose balance was honed by years of combat training, stumbled back a single step but immediately planted his feet, holding his ground like an ancient oak tree. His body was a coiled spring of potential energy. Do not, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low growl that was far more threatening than their shouts. Touch me again. You given U.S. orders? Cobb shrieked, his voice cracking with indignation. You think you're in a position to give us orders? He surged forward. This time he didn't just push. He swung his pistol, which was still clutched in his hand, in a short, brutal, efficient arc. The hard polymer butt of the Glock connected with the back of Marcus's skull, just above the neckline. A universe of white-hot pain exploded behind his eyes. The flashing red and blue lights smeared into nauseating streaks. The world tilted violently. He staggered, a grunt of pure agony escaping his lips. But through sheer, indomitable force of will, he did not fall. He had taken worse hits in hand-to-hand combat training at Fort Bragg. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him on the ground. Stubborn son of a bitch, ain't he? Jensen observed with a detached cruelty. Cobb was now completely consumed by his rage, his face a blotchy, furious red. I said on your knees. He threw his entire stocky weight against Marcus's chest. At the exact same moment, Jensen kicked out, sweeping Marcus's legs from behind. The combined assault, the blow to the head, the loss of balance sight was too much. Marcus finally went down. His right knee hit the sharp, unforgiving gravel of the roadside with a sickening crunch. Cobb stood over him, breathing hard, his chest puffed out like a bantam rooster, high on his victory. There we go, he panted. That's better. See? Not so tough now, are you, boy? As Marcus knelt there, his head throbbing with a deep, pulsing ache, a wave of cold, clear fury washed over him, extinguishing the hot anger. This was no longer just a confrontation. This was an assault. He watched, his vision slowly clearing, as Jensen swaggered over to his open truck door. Without hesitation, Jensen began to ransack the interior. It wasn't a search. It was a violation. He grabbed the neat stack of papers from the glove compartment and contemptuously tossed them into the back seat. He opened Marcus's briefcase, pulling out classified briefing notes, personal letters, and a framed photo of Sarah and Maya. He looked at the photo for a moment, then tossed it carelessly onto the floor mat. An illegal search. Another felony to add to their growing list of crimes that night. You don't have a warrant for that, Marcus said, his voice strained but clear. Jensen shouted back from the car, his voice filled with glee. My warrant is my badge, asshole. Let's see what our big-shot federal employee is really hiding in here. Marcus Thorne knelt in the dirt and gravel of a Texas highway, a decorated combat veteran, a senior military officer, forced to his knees by two petty tyrants drunk on a thimbleful of power. The humiliation was a fire licking at his soul. But beneath that fire, something else was forming. The ice, the calm, cold, calculating fury of a predator who had been poked and prodded one too many times. He had followed protocol. He had tried to de-escalate. He had given them every chance to walk away. They had refused. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. He looked up at Cobb, who was still standing over him, enjoying his moment of dominance. Marcus's eyes were no longer angry. They were clear, focused, and as hard as diamonds. The game was over. Now the lesson would begin. I need to make a phone call, Marcus said. His voice was steady, devoid of the pleading they expected. It was a statement of fact, not a request for permission. Cobb let out a harsh, ugly laugh. A phone call? Oh, this is rich. You gonna call your lawyer? Your mommy? Go ahead. Call whoever you want. Nobody can help you out here now. Jensen, having found nothing of interest in the truck besides a testament to a well-ordered life, slammed the door shut and sauntered back over. Yeah, let him call Dale. This oughta be good. I want to hear this. They saw it as the last, desperate act of a defeated man. They thought he was bluffing, trying to grasp at some phantom of authority. Their arrogance had blinded them completely. They gave him the rope, fully expecting him to hang himself with it. Slowly, Cobb warned, his hand reflexively going back to the grip of his pistol as Marcus began to move. Real slow, with meticulous, deliberate movements, Marcus reached inside his leather jacket, which was now dusty from the ground. His fingers bypassed his wallet. They found the smooth, cool glass of his smartphone. He pulled it out, the screen lighting up his face in the darkness. His thumb moved with practiced efficiency, his fingers steady as a surgeon's. He didn't scroll to L for lawyer. He didn't scroll to S for his wife, Sarah. He went to his favorites list, a short, exclusive collection of numbers known only to a handful of people. His thumb hovered for a fraction of a second over a single entry, then pressed. The entry didn't read the boss or work, just read Vance. He put the phone to his ear. It rang only once, a single, clipped burst of sound before it was answered. There was no greeting, no hello. Just a single, powerful word spoken in a voice that was pure, distilled authority. Vance. The voice was that of General Michael Vance, a 4-star general and a senior member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was a man who commanded armies, a man whose decisions shaped global events. He was also Marcus Thorne's direct superior and a friend who had served with him in the dust of Afghanistan. Marcus's entire demeanor shifted. The weary traveler, the humiliated victim, they both vanished. The colonel was back and he was making his report. General Vance, this is Colonel Thorne, he said, his voice crisp and clear, the perfect enunciation of a military officer. There was a slight pause on the other end of the line, the sound of a powerful mind shifting gears. Then General Vance's voice came back, sharpened with immediate concern. Marcus, what's your status? It's almost 0200 hours. I thought you'd be halfway to Austin by now. Cobb and Jensen exchanged a look of smug, confused amusement. The word general had registered, but they wrote it off as part of the act. A friend from the VFW, maybe. It was pathetic. Marcus continued, his eyes locked on Officer Cobb's. Sir, I have a situation. I am currently located on U.S. Highway 59, approximately 5 miles south of the town of Oak Creek, Texas. I've been unlawfully detained by local law enforcement. The officers' names are Dale Cobb and Roy Jensen, badge numbers 714 and 822. He was reporting, giving coordinates and enemy combatant details. His mind was a tactical map. Jensen snickered. He's giving him our badge numbers. I'm so scared. Marcus ignored him, his voice dropping, becoming more clipped and precise. Each word a carefully placed charge. The traffic stop was made without just cause. Sir, I have been subjected to physical assault with a weapon. I have a head injury. They have conducted an illegal search of my vehicle and personal effects. I am currently being held on my knees at the side of the road. The silence that followed on the other end of the line was absolute. It was a vacuum, a void more terrifying and more threatening than any shout could ever be. Marcus could picture the general perfectly. Sitting up in his chair, his face hardening, the gears of immense power beginning to turn. Then Vance's voice came back, and all traces of warmth or concern were gone. It was a voice of pure, cold fury. It was the voice of a man about to bring down hell. Say again their names and department, Colonel. Officers Dale Cobb and Roy Jensen, Marcus repeated calmly. Oak Creek Police Department. As he spoke, he subtly angled the phone downwards. The camera lens was active. He took a quick, perfectly clear photograph of the two officers standing over him, their faces illuminated in the strobe of their own patrol car's lights, arrogant, smug, and completely unaware of the thunderbolt that was about to strike them from 1,300 miles away. He texted the image. A confirmation tone beeped softly. Image sent, sir, Marcus reported. Understood, General Vance said, his voice a low growl. Hold your position, Colonel. I am handling this. Do not break this connection. Stay on the line. Cobb had finally had enough of the show. He stepped forward and kicked at Marcus's foot. All right, that's enough of this fantasy playtime. Who the hell was that? You think calling your army buddy is gonna scare us? Marcus Thorne looked up at Officer Dale Cobb, and for the first time that night, a faint, chilling smile touched his lips. It wasn't a smile of humor. It was a smile of finality. That wasn't my buddy, Marcus said, his voice quiet and devastating. That was General Michael Vance, Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he is the man who is, at this very moment, ending your careers. The words hung in the air, audacious and unbelievable. Cobb's face twisted in a sneer, ready to deliver another insult, another threat. But before he could speak, before he could even process the full weight of the name he just heard, the radio on his shoulder exploded to life. It wasn't the calm, routine voice of the dispatcher. It was a panicked, frantic shriek, the sound of pure, unadulterated terror flooding the airwaves. Unit 7. This is dispatch. Priority 1 message. Cease all activity immediately. I repeat, cease all activity. Stand down and release the driver. That is a direct order from Chief Morrison. Do you copy, Unit 7? The blood drained from Cobb's face as if a plug had been pulled. Jensen, who had been rocking on his heels with a smug grin, froze solid, his mouth hanging slightly ajar. They looked at the radio on Cobb's shoulder, then at each other in utter disbelief, and then, finally, at the man who was still kneeling calmly in the gravel, his phone still held to his ear. The power dynamic on that dark, lonely highway had not just shifted. It had been utterly and irrevocably reversed with the force of a nuclear detonation. The hunters had just become the prey. Marcus slowly, deliberately, got to his feet. He didn't rush. He moved with the quiet dignity of a man who was now in complete and total command of the situation. He brushed the dirt and sharp pieces of gravel from the knees of his ruined trousers, his movements methodical and unhurried. The throbbing in his head was a dull, distant drumbeat now, overshadowed by the cold satisfaction of impending justice. The two officers, Cobb and Jensen, stood frozen, their faces a mask of pale, sickening dread. The swagger was gone, replaced by the rigid posture of men who have just realized they have walked off a cliff and are suspended in midair. Without a word, Marcus reached into the inner pocket of his coat. It was the same pocket he'd reached for earlier to retrieve his wallet, but this time, he wasn't pulling out his driver's license. He withdrew a small, dark blue bifold case. He flipped it open with a flick of his wrist. He didn't shove it in their faces. He simply held it out, steady and firm, letting them see it clearly in the flashing lights. There, embossed in gold under the powerful seal of the Department of the Army, were the words that sealed their fate.
Colonel Marcus Thorne.
United States Army. The Pentagon. Jensen's jaw went slack. His eyes, which had been so full of contempt just minutes before, were now wide with pure, undiluted panic. Cobb stared at the ID, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air on a dry dock. The name, the rank, the location, it all crashed down on them with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't just harassed some random citizen. They hadn't just roughed up some out-of-towner. They had physically assaulted a senior field-grade officer on his way home from a strategic meeting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They had, in their ignorance and bigotry, committed a career-ending and potentially life-altering act of supreme stupidity. This is, Cobb stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. This is a misunderstanding. Sir Colonel, the title, which they had mocked, now felt like ash in his mouth. Marcus fixed him with a stare so cold it could have frozen fire. A misunderstanding? He repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. He took a single, deliberate step forward. Involuntarily, both cops flinched and took a shuffling step back. You called me a criminal. You put your hands on me. You struck me in the head with your weapon. You forced me to my knees on the side of a public highway. He paused, letting each charge land with the weight of a hammer blow. Tell me, officer, which specific part of that was the misunderstanding? We didn't know who you were. Jensen blurted out, his voice cracking. We were just doing our job. You didn't know who I was, Marcus repeated, his voice dropping even lower, each word laden with contempt. So that's the standard, is it? If I were just a regular guy, an ordinary black man driving home to his family, this treatment is acceptable? This is what doing your job looks like in Oak Creek, Texas. They had no answer. Their blustering arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind only the pathetic, clammy sweat of pure fear. Their world had been reduced to the flashing lights on their car and the terrible, damning silence of the man standing before them. Before another word could be spoken, a new sound ripped through the night. More sirens. But this sound was different. It wasn't the single wail of a patrol car. It was the converging chorus of multiple vehicles, approaching fast from the direction of the town. Within a minute, 2 more vehicles screeched to a halt on the gravel shoulder, their headlights pinning the 4 men in a brilliant, unforgiving glare. They were boxed in. One was a supervisor's patrol car, its markings identifying it as the shift commander. The other was a nondescript, unmarked black sedan that every cop in the country recognizes and fears. Internal Affairs. A man in his late 50s with a stern, weathered face and a chief's badge gleaming on his uniform, burst out of the supervisor's car. This was Chief Morrison, a man who had been woken from a deep sleep by a call that was every police chief's worst nightmare. He took in the entire scene in a single, sweeping glance, the disheveled and terrified officers, Colonel Marcus Thorne standing tall and composed despite the dust on his clothes, and the military ID still held firmly in his hand. The chief's face, already grim, turned thunderous. "Cobb! Jensen!" he roared, his voice booming across the highway. "What in God's name have you done?" "Chief," Cobb began, his voice pleading. "It was just a routine stop. It got a little sideways." "Shut up, Dale," Morrison bellowed, cutting him off. "Just shut your mouth. I just got off the phone with the Texas Rangers, who were contacted by a 2-star general at the Department of Defense, who was personally ordered to call me by a 4-star general at the Pentagon. They seem to have a vested interest in why one of their active-duty colonels is being held at gunpoint by 2 of my officers on the side of Highway 59. So, for the love of God, tell me what happened." The Internal Affairs officer, a quiet man in a suit, stepped forward and pointed a clinical finger at the body camera clipped to Cobb's chest. "The whole thing is on here, Chief," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Audio and video. We can pull the footage right now." Chief Morrison looked as if he might have an aneurysm. He turned his furious gaze back on his two officers. "You're suspended," he said, the words cold and final. "Both of you, effective immediately. Give me your badges and your service weapons. Now, get in the back of that car. You are a disgrace to this uniform and this department." The color drained completely from their faces. In the span of 15 minutes, they had gone from being the self-proclaimed kings of their little stretch of highway to being unemployed, disgraced, and the subjects of a major federal incident. With the situation with his own men handled for the moment, Chief Morrison turned to Marcus. His expression was a complex mixture of profound apology, professional dread, and utter embarrassment. "Colonel Thorne," he began, his voice now heavy with contrition. "On behalf of the Oak Creek Police Department, there are no words. I am deeply, profoundly sorry for the actions of these men." Marcus finally lowered the hand holding his ID. He nodded slowly, his eyes still hard as granite. "Your apology is noted, Chief," he said, his voice ringing with an authority that now far surpassed the chief's. "But sorry is not going to fix this. Sorry doesn't unring this bell. I want a full, top-to-bottom investigation, not just into them, into your entire department, into a system where two officers feel this comfortable, this empowered to act this way. I want to ensure that no one else, whether they're a colonel or a carpenter, ever has to go through what I just went through on this road tonight." The investigation that followed was as swift as it was brutal. The body cam footage was irrefutable, a perfect, high-definition recording of their bigotry and abuse of power. Captured every sneer, every insult, every illegal action. The police union, which initially made noise about defending them, went silent after viewing the first 30 seconds of the tape. Cobb and Jensen were summarily fired and, under pressure from the Department of Justice, faced a raft of criminal charges, including aggravated assault and official oppression. But it didn't stop there. As he had intended, Colonel Thorne's stand opened the floodgates. Once the story hit the local, then national news, dozens of other people from Oak Creek and the surrounding counties came forward. They were farmers, teachers, small business owners, mostly minorities, each with their own story of being harassed, intimidated, or shaken down by the same two officers. These were stories that had been dismissed or ignored for years. The scandal rocked the small Texas town to its core and triggered a full-scale pattern or practice investigation by the DOJ, leading to a complete overhaul of the police department under a federal consent decree. Chief Morrison was forced into an early, ignominious retirement. New training, new policies, and new leadership were brought in to try and cleanse the deep-seated rot. Marcus Thorne never wanted to be a headline. He politely but firmly turned down every request for an interview, every invitation to appear on the cable news talk shows. When a civil rights group wanted to give him an award, he declined, suggesting they give it to the community members who had been suffering in silence for years. He wasn't a hero, he insisted to his wife, Sarah. He was just a soldier and a citizen who had been pushed too far. He had done what his duty demanded. Not just his duty to the flag on his uniform, but his duty to the simple, fundamental idea that justice and respect should be for everyone, regardless of what they look like, what they do for a living, or what kind of car they drive. Months later, on a bright, clear afternoon, Marcus found himself driving that same stretch of Highway 59. This time, he was with his daughter, Maya, on their way to visit a family friend. As they approached the spot, he slowed the truck. The gravel shoulder looked perfectly ordinary now, just a dusty strip of land beside a quiet road. But for him, it would forever be a battlefield. Maya looked over at him. "Is this it, Dad? Is this the place?" He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "This is it." He looked out at the road, at the tall pines, at the wide Texas sky. He had won his battle here, but he knew the war was far from over. Power isn't always loud and aggressive. It isn't always the swagger of a man with a gun or the shriek of a siren in the night. Sometimes, true power is quiet discipline. It's the patience to endure, the courage to stand firm in the face of ugliness, and the unwavering knowledge that when you fight for what is right, you never truly fight alone. For two officers on a dark Texas night, they learned that lesson the hard way. A lesson delivered from over 1,000 miles away, by a man who reminded them, and an entire department, that respect is earned, not demanded, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon you have is the simple, unassailable truth. The story of Colonel Thorne on that dark Texas highway isn't just about the satisfying downfall of two racist cops. It's a deeper, more critical lesson about the true nature of power. For a moment, power was a gun, a badge, and a loud voice full of venom. It was fragile, insecure, and had to assert itself with violence and humiliation. But that's not real power. Real power is a long game. It's the icy calm in Colonel Thorne's veins, a discipline forged in literal wars, not just roadside squabbles. It's the quiet confidence of a man who knows the system, not just how to abuse it. The officers thought their authority was absolute, but it was just a tiny, isolated island. The colonel, with one call, tapped into the mainland. He demonstrated that true authority doesn't need to shout. It has the patience to endure, the wisdom to know precisely when to act, and the network to ensure that when it does act, the consequences are decisive and irreversible. It's a chilling reminder that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. We've just witnessed a dramatic power shift, but it raises a critical and uncomfortable question for all of us. Colonel Thorne achieved justice not just because he was morally right, but because he held a position of immense authority and could make a single phone call to the Pentagon. What does this say about the nature of justice in our society? Is true justice only accessible to those with power and influence, or was this a rare case where the system, when prodded by the right person, actually worked? We want to hear your perspective. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more thought-provoking content, and share it with someone who appreciates a story that goes beyond the surface.